Hey, good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the next webinar in our series, Bringing Data to Life. My name is Beth, and I work at the Office for National Statistics. We're really pleased to see so many of you join us for another episode of our webinar series, Bringing Data to Life, and today we'll be covering a beginner's webinar on crime statistics. Before we start, I'd just like to remind you that all the webinars in this series will be recorded and they'll be available on YouTube after the event. You'll receive an email about a week or so after the event with a link to the recording and the slides. All the slides and recordings from our previous webinars are now also available on the ONS website. Everyone signed up to this webinar will receive a link. If you're using the Microsoft Teams app and you'd like to turn on live captions for this webinar, please click on the More button across the top of your screen. For those of you who haven't used this before, it's the button with the three dots to the left of your camera button. And once you've clicked More, just scroll down to Languages and Speech and then select the option to show live captions. Because there are so many of you joining us today, the chat function is closed and all questions will be coming through Slido, and I'll cover this in more detail in just a moment. And this webinar series is for everyone, so please do share the recording and slides when they're available and join the conversation on socials using the hashtag statistics for the public good. Lastly, you'll be invited to complete a short survey at the end of the webinar, and we'd really welcome your feedback on the webinar and the statistics that we produce. So the session today is interactive with some questions for you, and there will be around 15 or so minutes of a Q&A section after the presentations. Please join in by scanning the QR code on your screen or heading over to slido.com and using the code hashtag BDTLcrime. That's BDTL for Bringing Data to Life and Crime. If you're using the desktop Microsoft Teams app, you can also click the S Slido button at the top of our screen and Slido will appear. The Slido code will also appear at the footer of every slide, so don't worry if you miss it. I'm really pleased to welcome our speakers today. So we're joined by Nick Stripe from the Office for National Statistics, who is our joint head of crime. Nick will explore the different types of crime data that we use, whether we're in the midst of a crime wave or not, and what to be mindful of when considering crime reports in the media. We're also joined by Nick Evans, who is the Deputy Police and Crime Commissioner for Gloucestershire. Nick will tell us more about the role of police and crime commissioners and how they can use data for policing, and he'll share some examples of what some of the data tell us. So without further ado, I'm really pleased to be handing over to Nick Stripe to unpick the story of crime at the ONS. Thank you.
Thank you, Beth, and welcome everybody. Thank you for joining this webinar. I'm not going to do much of an introduction other than to say I am Nick. I am the Joint Head of Crime Statistics, but I've got a lot to get through, so I'm going to crack on. Beth, next slide, please. So the first thing I want to do is to ask you what you think has happened to crime in the country as a whole over the past few years. There's no right or wrong answer here. It's just what you think. It's just your gut feel. What do you think's happened to crime in the country as a whole over the past few years? Brilliant. Thank you very much. And then next slide, please. Very similar question, but what do you think's happened to crime in your local area over the past few years? Again, no right or wrong answer. It's just what you see, what you feel, your gut feel. Okay, lovely. So the way I'm going to sort of approach this talk is to look at actually how crime has recently been reported in the press. So these are some press headlines on the back of some of our more recent crime statistics releases. We've actually just put one out today, and I might touch on some of the stats in that later on in the talk. But crime itself is obviously a very serious issue, and it's also a very emotive issue. So you get headlines like as follows. So why is theft so high? Gun crime soars by 30%. Knife crime epidemic continues to plague Britain's streets. Shoplifting epidemic, worse than official figures show. Donald Trump even weighs in from time to time and says a London hospital is like a war zone because of knife crime. vehicles being stolen, as harsh reality of crimes continues to impact drivers. And then you get people who are weaving in other agendas to the story of crime as well. So on the right hand side, it's no wonder Britain is in the grip of a petty crime wave, with cops wasting time probing hurt feelings. Crime is down, but we still think it's a mean world with some reason. And then the one on the bottom left, which I will come back to at the end, which is 5 charts showing Britain is already broken as the population is set to push past 72 million by 2032. So it's using one set of statistics that we produce, population projections, and weaving in how crime might show that we're broken already with the population set to rise. So different agendas coming in, lots of quite stark headlines drawing on that emotiveness of the issue. Next slide, please. So the question is, are we experiencing a crime wave, or are we not at the moment from those previous headlines? And indeed, if you watch your TV, you could watch crime on TV all day, every day, if you really wanted to, or social media these days. Something happens, it's gone around the world in 20 minutes, whether it's actually true or not. So let's try and stand back from all of that and answer the question with some data. Next slide, please. So the data that we use at ONS to try and answer that question are 2 key ones at the top. So that's police recorded crime data, and also the crime survey for England and Wales, which we run. We can also use supporting data. So we get data from charities and support services, victim services. We can look at hospital admissions data, and we can look at industry research that comes out as well. But whenever we're looking at this data or any data set, we always try and ask ourselves some key questions, and these are questions I'd like you to bear in mind. And they are, what is in the data? What is that data recording? How is it being put together? How is it being recorded? Has that changed over time? And as a result of answering those questions, is that data source the right source for the question we're trying to answer, which is, are we in the midst of a crime wave? So bear those questions in mind as we go through. Next slide, please, Beth. So with that little introduction, this is a little word cloud. So just type in what you think some of the challenges might be in terms of measuring crime data. Some good ones coming through. So how things are defined, whether things are reported or not, underreporting, quality of the data, consistency of that data over time, coding of that data. What about crime that isn't reported to anyone? How do we know about that? Paper-based systems, out-of-date systems. These are all great suggestions. Okay, good. I've got a very informed audience. This is good. So the first data source I'm going to look at is the crime survey for England and Wales. So what's this? It's an in-depth household survey which provides estimates of crime independently from what gets reported to the police. So it takes out of the equation, if you like, what has and hasn't been reported to the police. So what are we collecting? We go out and we talk to about 30,000 people every year, and an interviewer goes to their home in a face-to-face setting and asks them a vast slew of questions around their perceptions of crime, their worries of crime, and their experiences of crime, and drills down into those experiences to find out, well, what actually happened in that crime? What type of crime was it? So that we can code that data up accurately when we get it back. It asks also about more sensitive issues. So an interviewer will verbally ask questions about your experience of, say, criminal damage of your house, or violence that you might have experienced, or whether you've been the victim of theft. But some topics are harder to talk about and for people to answer and think about when they're being face-to-face setting with an interviewer. So there's a tablet which gets handed to respondents where they also give us information around more sensitive issues like domestic abuse, like sexual offences, and like stalking and harassment as well. So there's kind of 2 different kinds of measures coming out of that. One is a kind of count of the number of incidents of more traditional crimes and one is an idea of the proportion of people that have fallen victim to different types of those more sensitive crimes as well. Next slide, please. Now, the reason I've put this first slide up is because it's actually the questions that we include in the survey. Two of them are the ones that I asked you up front. So what do people think in terms of whether crime is going up both nationally and locally? And we can track this back. There was a slight change to the question about 15 years ago, hence the dotted line and then the thicker line. But the red is always at the national level, the blue is at the local level. So what did people think? And we can track this back to the mid-1990s. And it's actually pretty stable over time. There was a bit of a dip around 10 to 15 years ago. But generally speaking, there's a gap between people that think crime is going up nationally and crime going up locally in their local area. So about 15 minutes from their home is what we suggest. And that gap indicates that we probably are susceptible to that sort of media, that commentary that we bathe in every day, that we think that there's a lot of crime, but we perhaps see a bit less of it close to home. And so the perception is it's going up nationally, but perhaps less so locally. The local figure at the moment is probably not a bad guess. It's a bit of a mixed bag. Next slide, please. Actually, I should say that your numbers came out lower. So again, a very well-informed audience. You were about 50% thought it had gone up nationally and about 40% thought it had gone up locally. So again, the gap, but you were probably closer to reality. So are people worried about different crimes, and do they have confidence in the police? Again, these are the types of questions that we ask in the crime survey. I've just picked out these ones. Back to the 1990s, some key crime types that we ask about: burglary, car crime, violent crime. And then more recently, we've introduced questions on fraud as well. And you can see that generally over time, people are less worried about those more traditional types of crime. So about 25% of people were worried about violent crime back in 1998, turn of the century. And it's more like 8% of people are worried, personally worried, that they might fall victim to that now. Fraud is the highest, so it's about 16% of people are worried about falling victim of fraud. And if we think about what impact that might have in your confidence in the local police, we see a rising trend since this question was on the survey in 2006. So about 10 years ago, about 80% of us, just under, had confidence in our local police, but that has dipped in the last 10 years or so and is back in the mid-60s%. Next slide, please. So let's try and look at actual estimates of crime. So what we deem or term headline crime are those crimes that the interviewer is asking face-to-face respondents, and we can track those crime types back over a long period of time, back to the early 1980s. The reason there are some dots and some lines is that until the start of this century, the survey didn't run continuously. So it would be a year here or a year there. But since the turn of the century, it's run continuously. The two dots closer, so the 2 or 3 years ago, that was during the pandemic where we had to change the method of approach. We couldn't send interviews to people's homes. So there's likely to be a break in the data around that period. But what this shows is headline crime measured by the blue line. So that's your traditional violence, theft, criminal damage, robbery. Peaked in the mid-1990s, where our survey estimated around 20 million incidences of those types of crimes in England and Wales in that year, 1995. And at the moment, we're around about 5 million, just under 5 million. I'm showing data up to the end of the last financial year here, so around 5 million. The orange line is where we introduced fraud. So questions around experiences of fraud into the survey. They came in around 2016, 2017. And again, so we can track them back to that point in time. They jumped quite a lot during the pandemic, which may have been a reality, but may have been partly due to the way that we had to change how we administered the survey. Next slide, please. And we can think about that in terms of not only the number of incidents, but the proportion of people who respond to the survey that were victims of those crimes. So the top left chart is that same crime, but those same crimes, but not the number of incidents, the proportion of people. So again, back in the 1990s, about 40% of people that we interviewed had experienced one or other of those types of crime in the previous 12 months to the interview. And now that's down around 10% of people have experienced one or other of those types of crime. And when you add fraud in, it's around about 16% of people have experienced one or other types of those crimes. And you can drill down into the types of crimes because you can see some different pictures. Generally speaking, that broad pattern holds though. So victims of violence, we got up to about 4.5% of people had been a victim of violence back in the mid-90s. It's now around 1.5% of people. Theft, it's a biggie. So over 30% had been a victim of theft back in the mid-1990s. It's now around 7.5%, 8% of people. Robbery is much harder to measure, much less frequent crime, so tends to jump around a little bit, tends to have large confidence intervals around it, but it's about 0.2% of people victims of robbery in the last year at the moment. Criminal damage, about 2% of people. Again, that drop over time. And then fraud is the latest addition to the survey. It's quite a big one, so just under 8% of people victims of some form of fraud or computer misuse in the previous year. Next slide, please, Beth. And then picking up those more sensitive crimes and experiences. So this is where we hand the tablet to the respondent to give us more detailed information about stuff that might be hard to think about, might be hard to think that you've been a victim of it, might be hard to verbalize. And we just provide a prevalence measure. So that's the proportion of people that have been victims. And these measures started around 20 years ago. So from the left, people aged 16 to 59, that's what we've got the long-term time trend for. We do ask everyone now, but the long-term time trend is 16 to 59-year-olds. Has fluctuated, but it dropped about 10 years ago to about 1.5% of people said they'd been a victim of some form of sexual offence. That could be exposure, it could be unwanted touching, or it could be something much more serious. And in our latest data, it's just over 2.5%. So that has gone up in the last 10 years, having dropped in the 10 years before. Domestic abuse, there was a bit of a break in series where there were some changes to questions early on in what we're capturing here, but it's generally gradually slowly gone down from around 7% to about 5.5% now. And stalking, again, there was a break early on, but if we look after that break, it stayed relatively consistent. Around 4% of people aged 16 to 59 have experienced some form of stalking in the previous year. Next slide, please. So you might ask yourself, well, is that crime trend realistic? That's not what I feel. It's not what I read about. It's not what I see on my social media feed. It's not what I'm seeing in the shops, perhaps lately. Well, if you're thinking what you're seeing in the shops, remember this is a survey of private individuals. So this is not measuring crimes against businesses. It's also not measuring crimes against kids either. But we can look at other very similar countries to us, so similar that they form part of Great Britain and Northern Ireland. So the crime survey measures England and Wales. Scotland carry out a very similar crime survey to us, as do Northern Ireland. And all three of those surveys I can track back to 2008 to 2009. And I've put this into an index. So that first year's data I'm calling 1, and then I'm tracking change. To what degree has the level of crime changed in those three surveys over time? And what you actually see is a very close track for countries that are culturally, socially, and indeed their legal, lawful jurisdictions very similar to us, the types of crimes that we're measuring, very similar indeed, and it tracks almost exactly the results that we get from England and Wales. So that gives me a lot of confidence in the trend from the crime survey, as does the fact that we have not effectively changed our methodology for ages. Next slide, please. So now let's think about our second big data source, and that data source is police recorded crime data. So again, let's go back to the kind of questions we want to ask about this data source. So what is it? So it's crimes that we've experienced as the public, that we have reported to the police, and that the police have recorded on their systems. It includes also businesses, so crimes experienced by businesses reported to the police. It includes crimes experienced by kids as well as adults, so that's different to the crime survey as well. But it also includes crimes that are discovered by the police. So there might not necessarily be a victim per se, but there might be some focused action on sort of uncovering knives or uncovering drug offences, depending on police targets, what they're focusing their resources on. So it's a mixture of things, and it is slightly different to the crime survey. How is that collected? Well, things either have to be reported or discovered by the police, but also then recorded to them. And has that changed? That has changed over time. So I'm only going to show you data back to 2002, because that was when the National Crime Recording Standard was introduced across all police forces. Now, I say all police forces, there are 43 territorial police forces in England and Wales. They all operate different IT systems. They all have different QA procedures for this data, albeit working within the National Crime Recording Standard. So there are things that can cause differences in this data. Another key difference is that back around 10 years ago, there were audits done of police recorded crime because there was a gap developing between the crime survey and police recorded crime data. Police recorded crime data was going down a lot quicker than the crime survey, and so there were audits of police recorded crime, which indicated that for certain crime types especially, recording wasn't perhaps as good as it could be. And there have been real concerted efforts by the police since then to improve the recording of crime, and we can see that in the data. So what does that mean in terms of answering our question? How are crime trends changing? It means it's actually not a good source for looking at changes to trends over time, because there are changes in the way that things have been recorded over time. And we'll see that in some of the next slides. So next slide, please, Beth. So on the left-hand side, total crimes recorded by the police, and I'm excluding fraud here because that's captured in a slightly different way in police data. The first 10 years or so, you get a picture which is similar to the crime survey, going down, and then it changes. And that's as a result of these audits, which then put focused changes and improvements to the way the police recording crime. The dip you see in more recent years, that's the pandemic. So when we were all stuck in our homes, etc., there was an obvious dip in the number of crimes that were happening and being recorded by the police. The charts on the right-hand side are just showing you how comparable crime in the police data set compared to what we measure in the crime survey has changed over time. So the top one just shows total number of incidents, how that's changed and come closer together over time. And the bottom one is again an index showing the rate of change. So the blue line is police recorded crime over time. The orange line is the crime survey. So there was a gap developing back around the mid 2000s to the mid 2010s. That was what drove investigations into police recording. And then you can see the pickup and the improvements in police recording of crime since then. Next slide, please. Again, we can dive in to different headline crime types. And again, you can see the impact on, particularly on certain crime types, of that improvement in recording. So the top left is the previous chart that I showed you. And then the next one is violence against the person offences. Real improvements in both what the police are recognising, also in some of the legal definitions, particularly around things like stalking and harassment, which falls into this category. So these were crimes that were barely picked up, but now are quite significant crimes in police recorded crime data. And a big driver of those violence against the person increases are violent offences that might be more in the threats landscape, that don't actually cause injury, but the police are now recording much, much more fastidiously. Theft is the next one along the top row there. So it's a similar trend to the crime survey with that dip for the pandemic. Criminal damage and arson, long-term decline, then sort of has gone flat since those recording improvements. Robbery jumps around a bit more. It's quite a well reported and recorded crime. It's a serious crime, that one. And sexual offences, another good example of where recording improvements and perhaps culturally our willingness to report those crimes to the police has changed over the last 10 years or so. Next slide, please. So let's ask that same question we asked of the crime survey. Is that trend we see in the England and Wales police recorded crime number. Is that realistic? And again, we can compare against very similar jurisdictions, Scotland and Northern Ireland. In this case, I'm looking at rates per thousand population. So the red line is England and Wales. So a similar pattern that you've seen on the previous slides. The blue line is Scotland and the green line is Northern Ireland. So if you look at the crime survey, the Scottish one and the Northern Irish one, you look at the three different jurisdictions in terms of police recording crime, there's one line that sticks out as different, and that's the police recorded crime total for England and Wales. And we know that that has been affected by this real focus on improving the recording of those crimes. So the police recorded crime trend for England and Wales is probably not realistic, but it still gives us a wealth of important information. Next slide, please. And it particularly does that for lower volume, higher harm crimes. So these are crimes that we're very unlikely to pick up in the crime survey because of how low in volume they are, or because it's almost impossible to interview a victim. Ones that are often in the press, so the top right-hand slide, that's homicide. Fortunately, it is a relatively rare crime, although obviously devastating for people involved. But you can see it's generally at the moment between about 500 and 700 homicides per year. Police recorded crime is the only source to try and measure what's going on in homicide. And another one that gets a lot of traction is knife-enabled crime and also firearms offences. So the blue line is knife-enabled crime incidents. This is actually now calculated by looking at what's written on crime reports and looking for text and picking out where knives and sharp instruments are mentioned for serious types of crimes. And you can see that there is a pickup in the last 10 years or so. You can see the impact of the pandemic with that dip, but the pickup does coincide with when there were improvements to crime recording. So there could be a bit of improved descriptions, but there's likely to be something else going on there. There's likely to be a pickup. It's such a serious crime that reporting and recording is likely to be good. And then the orange line is firearms offences, which has actually dropped since the last 20 years and is relatively flat in the last 10 years or so, although has dropped 20% in the last year's data that we've just published today. Just thinking about knife-enabled incidents, this is where looking at other data sources can help us as well. So that bottom smaller chart in the middle, that is NHS hospital admissions, so people that have been taken in as inpatients for assault with sharp objects. So their health record is coded as an assault with a sharp object. And actually we see in terms of those really serious offences, there's been a drop in the number of those in the last 10 years or so. Again, there could be issues with how that's recorded, the amount of time that registrars have got to collect that information, but it shows a different picture for those more serious offences to police recorded crime data. Next slide, please. So let's go back to the start. Let's revisit those headlines. We had headlines saying theft is so high. So is theft really so high? So I'm just some pen pictures from both the crime survey data and police recorded crime data showing that actually over time, theft offences as a whole, which incorporates a lot of things, but have generally been declining or are flattish in recent years. Is there a knife crime epidemic? There is some evidence that there's certainly been a reasonable uptick in knife-enabled crime. It's still relatively rare. It's about 50,000 offences in the last year, but certainly an uptick. And we're almost back to pre-pandemic levels of knife-enabled crime. Gun crime, more down. And then next slide. Shoplifting, this is one that does show in the last few years a really significant jump in the number of shoplifting offences being recorded by the police, but it's one that we know is very underreported. So you've got to be a bit careful with shoplifting offences, but all the evidence points to a big tick up in shoplifting offences. And vehicle crime, actually, it's quite flat over the past 10 or 15 years or so. So yes, it always impacts drivers, but it's not as if it's going up at the moment. And then last slide, I think, please, Beth. This was that headline chart that shows that Britain's already broken. Now, you should recognise this chart. So the chart that was being used in this article to claim that Britain was broken and that crime was out of control was showing that one trend line that I don't think should be used as a trend line, which is England and Wales police recorded crime. It also cut the axis off at 40 to make things look a bit worse than it was. So it's an example how things could be misrepresented. Next, and definitely I think final slide. So some final thoughts. Understand your data sources, your topic and its context. You need to do that to really draw some conclusions, and we will try and do that for you in our bulletins. Nuance isn't going to sell newspapers, isn't going to encourage you to click on things, but bad news does. So think about where a commentator might be coming from. If you see words like shocking, exclusive, revealed, there might be something behind it, but they want you emoted. So is data being used selectively? Are they using certain time periods? Does a chart scale not start at 0? And if not, why not? If we're not measuring it, we can't understand it and no one can change it. So if you're invited, please do take part in our surveys. It really is for the public good. Thank you very much. And Nick, I will hand over to you.
Thank you very much, Nick. Yes, you're blessed with a brace of Nicks today. Good afternoon, everybody. I'm Nick Evans. I'm the Deputy Police and Crime Commissioner for Gloucestershire. And it's very good to be here and to be able to describe how in our office we use Office of National Statistics data to inform the work that we do and to try and make our beautiful county, which you can see behind me, safer. So if you go to the next slide, please, Beth. So first of all, I'm very impressed that we seem to have quite a well-versed audience. So the first set of questions might be slightly better than I was anticipating the results to be, which is actually, what does a police and crime commissioner do? Then we're going to move on to the practicalities of monitoring police performance in Gloucestershire, what we do and how we do it, and then the way that we use the differences between ONS and police data. So if we click on Beth, this is our first slide out. So what do you think a police and crime commissioner does? What do you think the role actually is? Goodness me, look at that straight away. I am very impressed with the level of responses that we're getting there. 120 of you already holding the Chief Constable to account. That is a perfect answer, particularly when we are looking at statistics. If we move on, you will see that you're exactly right. And in fact, we do all of those things that were on the board there, which I was a little bit disappointed about when I saw the slides and the questions that we were going to be asking. I do always like to have a sort of Wolverhampton Wanderers answer on there, but all of those answers are the things that we do. So police and crime commissioners have been around for about 10 years, or over 10 years now. But the role is a little bit misunderstood. So one of the things that we do like to do is to make sure that everybody understands where we are coming from and the nature of the role. And so we, well, I say we, I'm not directly elected, but my boss is. So he's directly elected by the people of Gloucestershire to essentially be the public's voice in policing. And the way that we do that is by being directly accountable to the public. We can hire and fire chief constables. We set the priorities for policing in our area based on the conversations we have with people during our election campaigns and then during the term. And then we hold the Chief Constable to account, as you've already expertly answered on our last Slido, for the delivery of those priorities. So those priorities are set through something called our Police and Crime Prevention Plan. That's what we call it here in Gloucestershire. To make sure that we are keeping the county safe. We also then set the budget for policing to make sure that the chief is able to deliver on those priorities as much as we're able to within the constricts of national funding and your council tax as well. So you will see a line on your council tax bill for police and crime commissioners as well. I say that the PCC can appoint chief constable. They're also able to appoint deputy police and crime commissioners, and our roles are slightly different around the country. But one of the things that they can do is step in when your boss has inadvertently injured themselves on the morning of a presentation. And they can step in right at the last minute to do a presentation to give or take about 450 people on national statistics. Other things peace and crime commissioners do, which aren't always necessarily as well understood amongst the public, are we commission a lot of services as well. So victim support services are all commissioned by police and crime commissioners. That's specifically designed to make sure victims of crime and very specific crime types of victims have the support they need to be able to see their way through the criminal justice system and help them cope and recover from what they have suffered. We also fund a variety of different crime prevention services to address issues like drug and alcohol addiction, youth crime, antisocial behaviour and violent crime as well, and we'll come on to that a little bit later. And when we are doing both of those pieces of work, using data that either the constabulary hold themselves or the ONS data is a really important part of how we put that data to good use, which I'll come on to later on. And then, because we very firmly believe that policing can't solve these problems alone, we also work with our partners as well. So other partners in the criminal justice system, so the Crown Prosecution Service, the Probation Service, the Court Service, but also our local authorities, health services and education colleagues as well, to make sure that we're all working together to make the county or make our police force area as safe as humanly possible. And one of the biggest drivers we have to help us do that is using data to be able to know where to look and what to do. So that's a quick canter through as to what police and crime commissioners do. As I said, in Gloucestershire, one of the things that we're particularly keen to do is making sure that is delivering that holding to account role and monitor the performance of the constabulary. Now, fortunately, it is not just the police and crime commissioner and myself doing this job. We have an office of experts who are able to support us in doing that vitally important job, because certainly when I was given the brief for this session, I was told there was going to be a great deal of people who are sort of statistical novices in the audience, which I was particularly pleased about, because I would definitely characterise myself as one of those as well. But I'm very lucky to be supported in our office by two excellent senior researchers who are able to dig through this data for us and then put some analysis alongside it to help us point to what we're looking at and know the right questions to ask, so that we can deliver on that holding to account role, holding the police to account and holding partners to account as well, using the convening. Some reason Siri is having trouble hearing me, but I hope you all can. Delivering that holding to account role, holding the constabulary and holding partners to account as well. Now, the way that we've done that, we've worked very hard over the last year or so to make sure that the data that we're using is as rich as possible. So on the one hand, we can look at our own local data, which gives us a particular flavour. We can look at those statistics, whether they're going up or down, or is there something in particular in a particular district of the county that we're looking at. But we also want to be able to compare that with other forces who are similar to us, other forces in our region, to look at whether there is a geographical difference that we're looking at, or whether Gloucestershire is an outlier itself. So that local and national perspective on some of our data is really important as well. We've already touched slightly on the importance of the police recorded crime and the fact that those are types of crimes that are reported. Now, in Gloucestershire, reporting crime wasn't, we were one of those forces that weren't particularly good at following the crime recording standards, and got picked up on that by then Her Majesty's Inspectorate of Constabulary and Fire and Rescue Services. Since our particularly bad report on crime data integrity, as it's called, we are now one of the outstanding forces in the country at doing it. So it's amazing what you can do when you look at some statistics. But what that does show for our county, for example, is the impression that crime has gone up quite considerably in the area. But as we've already discussed, that's not always necessarily the case. And that's where that additional analysis is so important, to dig into those statistics and look at actually why is that happening and what's the rationale behind it. And I think we'll go on to the next slide to have a look. Our next slider, which is how do you think using data can help to effectively reduce crime rates? So this is going to come up as a word cloud. So do take the opportunity to drop some words in. What do you think we should do? How we can do things to use our data? This really is a very well informed audience. I'm loving the responses that we're getting coming up already. So target resources, focusing resources, absolutely. Demography of victims, I'm particularly pleased to see on there. Well done, whoever said that, because we can look at the way our diverse communities can be affected by different sorts of crime as well. Identifying trends is definitely something that I'm very keen on. And we can also use it. Hotspot policing, whoever said that, well done. That's exactly one of those things that we do. And are encouraged to do so, in fact, by the Home Office. So very pleased to see all that. Yeah, some really, really great answers there. And that's exactly what we do. So we've already talked a little bit about the data that we use. And the way that we use it. And this is a really good example of just a basic, this is made up data, so it doesn't necessarily correlate to anything. But this is where we'd be looking at constabulary data to look at the amount of crime over a particular time period. So the way that we will do that is that we would look at the level or the limits of crime that we would expect to see in the area. And then we would establish those, that what we'd consider sort of the normal range. Now, I've already told you that I'm not a statistician. So helpfully, one of our excellent senior analysts has written me up a little thing here to explain the sort of graph that we're looking at, which is called a process control chart. There we go. I couldn't even remember the name of it. So this is essentially every time you bake cookies. So it's based on cookies rather than crime to help us learn how we're how these sorts of charts are put together. So you collect data. So every time you bake some cookies or biscuits, if you prefer, you write down how many cookies you've made and how they have turned out to be perfect. You make the chart, and then you draw on that chart a line showing the number of perfect cookies every time you bake. That's the little blue line that you can see jotting up and down and dancing over the chart. Then you draw two more lines on that chart, one at the top and one at the bottom. Those are the grey lines that you can see at 10 and 20 on the chart here. And those lines show you the highest and lowest number of perfect cookies that you would expect to bake. So then as you're progressing through, you then check the chart. Each time you bake, you put another dot on for the number of perfect cookies. And if the dots stay between the top and bottom lines, you're doing pretty well. But if a dot goes outside of that line, you know that something's wrong and you need to fix it, which is that final indicator that you can see on the far right-hand side of the chart there. So that's a process control chart, and it works whether you're making cookies or whether you're trying to spot different types of offending or issues with crime statistics as well. What it does, it helps you be able to spot problems quickly. Some things outside the control bars. Why is that? What's going on? And that's when you then need to look at the additional nuance and context around those statistics from our point of view to understand, is that something that's an administrative or a bureaucratic point, or is there something more significant there that we might need to look at and intervene with? Now, if we click on to the next slide. So that was looking at the local statistics, so the information that the constabulary holds itself. But it's all very well looking at that, but what are our other forces in the area, or our most similar group of forces looking at? So what we like to do is establish the average for forces that are very similar to Gloucestershire. Now, Gloucestershire is a beautiful county, as I've already said, but we are a very small police force area. We only have about 600,000 people living in the county. One city, a very beautiful city with a fantastic cathedral, but then a very large rural area. So there's absolutely no point in me comparing our crime type, our prevalence of particular crime types to inner city London, for example, or the sort of far end of Norfolk, because those forces aren't necessarily similar to what we have. So we have there's a set of police forces that were all sort of grouped together that the CIPFA, which is the Chartered Institute of Public Finance, I can't remember what the A stands for, but the statistical boffins who look after our finances have grouped forces together who are vaguely similar in terms of population, crime types that they've already seen, and so that it gives us a much better comparison between areas. So our neighbouring forces, for example, one of our neighbouring forces in Gloucestershire is Avon and Somerset Police. Now, they have a very large urban centre in Bristol. They're absolutely right next door to us, but they're not represented in one of our most similar group of forces because of the type of crime and the large geographical area that they cover as well. So what we like to do is establish our crime types across those most similar group of forces to see whether we would be an outlier in what we call our RMSG as well. This is going to test me now whether I can decipher and remember what our most similar group of forces are. So on the chart there, you can see Warwickshire, Cambridgeshire, Devon and Cornwall, Suffolk. I'm pretty certain that's West Mercia, Gloucestershire, Wiltshire, and North Yorkshire Police. Now, from what you can see on this chart here, we're roughly in the middle. That's usually a good place to be. We're also slightly above Wiltshire. Now, I'm assuming that this is a good thing to be slightly above Wiltshire, because in Gloucestershire, certainly we always generally like to be above Wiltshire because we're the oldest force outside of the Met, and they are the second. And don't let them tell you any different. But we produce charts like this once a month or quarter or year-on-year percentage to give us that temporal analysis of what we would be looking at and what we wouldn't be, what we should be looking at and what we shouldn't be. So if you'd like to go to the next slide, Bethan. So that was speaking in general terms. Now, we've already touched slightly on shoplifting. These are the sort of data that we would, the sort of precise data that we would then wanting to be looking at and to bring all that to life. So what you can see here is the local trend analysis of how our shoplifting has been, how much shoplifting has been reported in Gloucestershire since February 2022, and you can see that going up. So that creates a bit of an abnormally high level above that sort of midway point, and an increasing trend as well. So we're outside of the control bars, and we're increasing according to our police.uk figures, which is obviously the national stats that we use. But then, because as we've already said, forces report their data in a different way. We want to make sure, and we want to make sure that we're not an outlier as the county. So we'll use the Office of National Statistics data to then be able to compare with our most similar groups of forces. So here you can see us compared to the MSG average, and you can see that generally speaking, Gloucestershire has been slightly above those figures. We dipped down slightly in August last year, but now we have peaked back up again. So that shows the similar, so it shows a similar trend to the local trend analysis. So that would indicate to me that that's something that we would definitely want to be looking at and digging into a little bit more. So if we go to the next slide, we can see how we are comparing with our most similar group of forces. So we're then just below and not abnormal compared to forces for the latest quarter. So that would indicate that maybe if we were just looking at a snapshot of figures, then there might be something that we would have to that we don't have a problem and we don't need to worry about it. But because we were able to compare not only with our forces in our most similar group, but over a period of time as well, we can see that on the right-hand side for the latest 12 months, we can see that we are still above. So that is definitely something that we'd want to be looking at. So it's average, but not abnormal. But I would still consider that to be something that we want to be considering and digging into a little bit more. So we go to the next slide, Beth. I'm conscious of time. So rising crime figures don't always necessarily lead to a concern, because as we've already covered, they could be in relation to something that's to do with a specific police operation, for example, targeting shoplifters. It could be a particular police operation looking to take into account a variety of different offences that one particular offender has committed, and that could see a spike in reports of crime that have been discovered by the police, but are actually historic offences that may not have been reported in the first place. The improvements in recording practices I've already talked about. Proactive policing operations might well be why recorded crime is going up, because as we've already covered, that includes offences that have been discovered by the police at the time. Now, at a first glance, as we've already covered, the shoplifting is increasing. However, that is in line with the national average and of our similar forces. So it's not a trend that's unique to our county, but something that we would always want to do is actually encourage more reporting so that we can get a truer representation of those figures. Because it then gives us an opportunity to dig into that data and then look at what we might be experiencing in Gloucestershire and what other interventions we might be able to bring in to help deal with the situation. The analysis from Gloucestershire showed, by the way, that there was a link to cost of living increases in Gloucestershire, which is what increased that level of shoplifting that we were seeing, along with some targeted operations that were going in the city centre in Gloucestershire, which led to that spike as well. If we kick on to our next slide. So that was just one example of how we've used shoplifting data there. But I've already mentioned our two fabulous senior analysts. The reports that they've been able to create using the data provided by an Office of National Statistics are now almost nationally available because of the quality of the data that's provided by the ONS. It gives PCCs that opportunity to hold their own chief constables to account, but also to compare themselves with other force areas around the country and do what we like to describe in policing as steal with pride. So we could go up to West Mercia, find out what they've done, and see how they've managed to deal with a certain type of crime and target our interventions. I will leave it there, Beth, and see whether we want to move on.
Brilliant. Thank you so much to Nick and Nick. I'm sorry that we've run over a little bit. We should still have some time for questions, but if I just ask if you could both keep your questions and answers fairly brief, that would be really helpful. We'll try and answer them in most popular question first, so just give a thumbs up to any question that you really want answered. And if we haven't had time to answer your question today, our inbox is always open and you can get in touch with us at engagement.hub@ons.gov.uk. We'll also send out any sources that were cited in today's presentation over to you via email directly after today's webinar, and the recording and slides will follow within the next 2 weeks. Okay, so on to some of the questions. So the first one is from Jem. So she's asked, I think this is one for Nick Stripe. So, oh, it's split, but I'll keep going with Jem. So as you stated, the CSEW conducts surveys. This is only those whom have a household. What is being done to include those who are not homeowners, such as children and the homeless?
Yeah, that's a good question. So about 98% of the population of England and Wales lives in a household. So we're capturing most people. But in terms of kids, there was a survey which we ran off the back of the crime survey, which is if there were kids present in the house, then we would attempt to interview one of those for a more targeted children's crime survey. That suffered a lot from falling response rates. So we're currently redeveloping that survey to work online and to use a different sampling frame. So we've got plans afoot to get back to recapturing data on kids. In terms of people that don't live in private households, the homeless is a good example. People who live in institutions is another good example. Actually, student halls of residence is another example. That's tricky. We don't have plans at the moment. We know that that is a data gap in what we're seeing. So you ask a very relevant question that we were aware of, but at the moment we do not have the resources to try and do anything about it.
Thank you, Nick. The next one we have is our data on violence against women and girls is inadequate. The ONS produces the VAWG data landscape, which shows this to be true. What is being done to produce accurate data on this issue?
Yeah, so that's the reason why we try as hard as we can with those complete on tablet modules to capture information about those kinds of sensitive issues as part of the survey. We tend to get about 6 times more people indicating they've been a victim of something in that space than we do through the main interview itself. So that's our main route through. We also capture a lot of data from victim services and support services and charities as well. Helpline data or number of people that are taken into emergency accommodation, which can also help to shed a light on, and also can give us some good, actually qualitative feedback from people that are in there in terms of their experiences. That's kind of in the violence against women space, and we're also looking to update question banks in those modules as well. So the legal landscape changes, the possibilities enabled by online behaviour changes things. So we're currently towards the end of a 2-year piece of work to update our domestic abuse module, and we're currently updating the questions for our sexual assault module. The government wants to track violence against women and girls, so we're actually asking these modules of everyone in the survey. We used to do split samples just because of the time constraint on the survey, but we're now starting to ask these questions of everyone so that we can give an overall prevalence level from the survey on those things. In terms of the girls, that's tricky. But we are a long way through a really tricky piece of research into can we ask a survey to kids around safety during childhood and some really sensitive issues that come along with that. It's gone through lots of work, including lots of ethical work. We're partnering with the NSPCC on this, and we are currently hoping to pilot that survey towards the end of this year. If that goes well, then we would hope to roll out, funds permitting, a more wide-scale survey on that issue next year.
If I could jump in on that one as well, but that's something that we're particularly aware of and keen to. We're very lucky to have the national lead for violence against women and girls as our chief constable, Maggie Blythe, and this is something that she's really very keen on. So one of the things that we always want to do is encourage more reporting. That's one of the things that we will always talk about, but it also has to be a recognition that people have the confidence to report and confidence that they will be taken seriously. So then that comes into a little bit of the sort of public confidence in policing space, and while we're doing so much work to try and encourage that to be improved as well by by speaking to victims, making sure that any sort of allegations will be taken seriously and they'll be progressed through the whole criminal justice system as quickly as possible. Things like specific operations between policing and the CPS to make sure that VOG offences are expedited through the system as quickly as possible, so we don't lose victims going through the sort of withdrawing their support as they're going through the criminal justice system as well. But just finally on the data point, absolutely agree that the reported data isn't always necessarily doesn't necessarily reflect the reality, which is why the crime survey for England and Wales is so important, but also some of that health service data that you're talking about as well can be really useful as well, that we can use to try and then inform the interventions and perhaps some campaigns to encourage more reporting and bring more people forward.
Brilliant. Thank you both. I'm really conscious of time and conscious that people are starting to drop off. I might suggest that perhaps we have a look at these questions after and maybe try and theme up some of them and then maybe share some answers after today's call, because I know that we haven't been able to answer many of them.
I can see a very quick one where that I can actually answer. The difference between theft and robbery. Theft is taking something. Robbery is taking something and hitting somebody at the same time.
Brilliant. Thank you very much. Well, on that note, we'll move on to our upcoming webinars. So thank you so much, Nick and Nick, for your really interesting responses and really interesting presentations. I've really appreciated listening to you, and I hope everyone on the call has as well. I just want to mention that we've got 2 new events which are now available to register for on our Eventbrite page. They are prices around houses and private rentals and also GDP. We do have 2 webinars that will be taking place in June and July, but we're just firming up some dates for those, so they'll be released very soon. So just have a follow of our Eventbrite page to get notified when these go live. There are some more ways that you can get involved with us: attending other series in the event, following us on social media, responding to our consultations and engagement questionnaires, and also responding to surveys if your households are selected. As Nick said, we really value your time and responses so that we can gather meaningful data across the UK to better understand our society. So before you go, or once you have left, we'd be really grateful if you could share how you found today's event. This can all be done on the Slido page that you've been using today, and our quick survey will be live there, and we'll send you a quick link to this after too. Thanks again to Nick and Nick for your presentations, and thanks to everyone for joining us today, and we will see you next time. Take care. Bye-bye.
Thanks, Beth.
Bye-bye.